Hey everybody, this is a very quick video to kind of explore a number of popular dungeon crawl type games, ones that I've purchased and I've enjoyed playing, and maybe it'll be helpful to you. But I've looked at Gloomhaven, the Dungeons and Dragons tile system, Descent, Mage Knight, Massive Darkness. So those are the main ones that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to throw in a couple of others that you may not have even heard of. Of course, Lord of the Rings, the card game, and some ones that you might not have heard about is Redemption, Dragon Raid, and the One Deck Dungeon. My interest is in solo gaming and the dungeon crawl type of game. But I also really appreciate the strategy thinking type of games that Mage Knight and Gloomhaven have with the combat system. If you want to know more in detail about any of the games, you can either see some of my videos or, there's lots of them out on the net. Okay, so I'll do this in a top 5 type of fashion, but I'm going to start out with some honorable mentions, and this is a game that I imagine that most of you have never heard of, and it's the thing that kind of started me in these dungeon crawl type of games, and it's a game called Dragon Raid, and it's an RPG type of game, but it has a Christian theme to it. So since I'm a Christian, this really is the thing that I like about this game, is that theme of the heroes fighting evil and the Christian perspective. So this really can't be considered a board game. I just put it in there as a nostalgic kind of point back to what kind of got me started. Second honorable mention, nostalgic nod, is to another game that you probably haven't heard of. It's called Redemption, and this one, it is a board game in the adventure. It's not really a dungeon crawl, it's more of an adventure kind of thing, but again, it has that Christian theme of rescuing souls. And so I actually sometimes take cards from this game and use them in the other game as part of the treasure or the goal of the scenario or the quest to rescue people. So that's why I'm including this one. 2 more honorable mentions that I'll go over is Lord of the Rings, the card game, and another one that I'll talk about. This one here I include here because it is the first game that I got that was a solo or solitaire type of game. So all the ones that I have purchased are the solitaire type games because it's I have grown kids and it's hard for me to find people to play with and stuff like that. So that's why I choose the solitaire type of games. And so Lord of the Rings, the card game, I love the Lord of the Rings. And this was the first one, the first kind of game that I could find that you could play solitaire. So many people love this game. I no longer really play this. It just was not very easy for me to get into the adventure mode. It seemed just more like dealing with the card hands, and it really took me out of the experience. So I really don't play this anymore. The cards are beautiful. It's really nice production quality, but just not really something that puts you in that mindset of, an adventure fighting the evil, at least for me. So the last one that I want to talk about is a kind of an honorable mention is the One Deck Dungeon. And this is a little game that I found when I first started looking a couple of years ago for the dungeon crawl type of experience and in the solitaire mode. And this one was inexpensive. I think it was about $17. And so I ordered that while I was trying to decide which game that I wanted to get. It's a very nice game. It's small, you can just take it out. So if you want to just play something really quick, it's 30 minutes to an hour depending upon the adventure, and you go through the dungeon and you basically are matching you roll dice and you match them to kind of defeat the enemies. So it's not really put you into the theme of the dungeon crawl, but you kind of get that experience a little bit, but it's really about matching the die. And I've got videos on this you could take a look at, and I'm sure there's others on the net. But I just thought I'd mention this one because it's fun for a little quick thing. Number 5. My number 5 is Descent, Journeys in the Dark, 2nd edition. Now, the thing that I love about Descent is it's very beautiful tiles and cards. They have very nice figures, and so it's a really beautiful game to play. But the things that I don't like about it is that out of the box, it's really a two-player game. But you can I use a 20-sided die that I throw in here to allow me to make decisions for the monster cards. So you can use them in an AI type of fashion if you just, add the die to do some kind of random things. And there actually is an app that you can go online and get for playing single player mode. But that's just a little bit more that you can't take it, just straight out of the box to play those characters. But the other thing is that these tiles are not just a standard size, and so getting a way to get it in the box was a challenge. I had to create my own foam core system, and now it organizes really well, but that was a challenge for a number of people. The other thing that's really good about it is the scenario book. So I have several of those books, and they add a lot of flavor, and so that's really, really nice with that game. So even though this is number 5, it can easily, depending upon my mood and what I want to do, it can easily rise up the levels. This one here, I just find that I don't play it as much because it's a little bit more complicated to set up all the tiles and everything, because I've got to dig them out and things like that. It's not quite as easy to get to them and not quite as easy to pack it up. So it's really the breakdown, the setup and breakdown that's really the barrier for this game a little bit. One other thing to note about Descent is that Star Wars Imperial Assault implements Descent, but in a Star Wars theme. Number 4. My number 4 dungeon crawl type of game is Massive Darkness. So Massive Darkness is a game that I just couldn't wait for it to come out. It was really looked interesting, and I liked some of the videos online that showed it. And it is beautiful. What I like about it is the component quality is incredible. Just quickly, you can see this is just the top tray, and there's like 2 trays and actually some other monsters. So there's just a ton of miniatures. So if you just want miniatures, it's worth the price just for that. And each character has its own board to keep track of health and experience, and you can see the weapons that you've got equipped and the armor and the character. And so this is really, really nice to keep that organized well, and you can see the different types of weapons. So that's really nice. In addition, the rule book is beautiful and it's easy to understand and follow. Very, very well done. Now, when I first heard about Massive Darkness, the thing that attracted me the most were the class sheets that you have, and the character had its own set of skills, but you could mix it with any class sheet that you want, and then they level up. So you can see all these weapon cards, the different levels, and so the concept was that you could create your own character, and they could be very unique, and they would level up during a single game. In addition, I thought the symbols on the dice were kind of cool, so that was pretty neat. So the challenge with Massive Darkness is that the basic rules, as you play them, it takes quite a long time if you're going to play the game the way the rules say. A number of people have also had challenges with balancing the difficulty level as you level up, things like that. But for me, the major challenge was that it was extremely fiddly. So, you're constantly getting new weapons, and you can transmute them and things like that. So you're always looking at, okay, well, this has this ability, and this has a different ability. Which weapon is better? Which one should I choose? And, which one should I get rid of? And so the whole time, I just felt like I was always looking at new weapons and just trying to decide what weapon I wanted to use. And then, as you would go through combat, the question as I roll my dice and I try to see what happens and what's the result. Well, I've got to check over here. You know, I check on the special ability over here. Am I in shadow mode? Then I can add this. Or, you know, is this special skill here? Or do I look over here and then kind of look for the health on the skill level? Or what about the different cards and what happens? And so you're kind of looking everywhere and trying to figure out what you do. And trying to do that in a short period of time, you know, an hour, hour and a half kind of thing is the time frame that I'm looking for. It just was constantly fiddly. And the other thing is I didn't really have the sense of feeling that every single monster was really radically different. Now, they are very different in terms of whether they're a magic or melee or ranged enemy, and they have their different strengths and everything, and they definitely look different, but they don't really feel that different, because in the end, you're just really rolling dice and trying to calculate whether you win or lose. So the experience that I hoped to have straight out of the box really didn't materialize. Now, one other point that I briefly mentioned was another cool thing. One thing that's really cool about Massive Darkness is this shadow and light kind of effect. So that's a really good idea. One of the things that I didn't like in terms of the rules was that even if you're in shadow mode, a ranged character can still see you. You're still, if you're in line of sight, they can still get you even if you're in shadow mode. So if you're looking for a game that you can just take out of the box and you can play with the basic rules and just have this deep immersive experience, this may not be the game for you. But there's lots of people that were very interested in this game, and so if you go onto Board Game Geek, you might see lots of different variations of this. And I've even posted a video that I call the Risk variant. So it uses a risk type of combat to give it a faster way to do the combat. And I don't use the skill sheets. I actually created my own tokens. But so if you buy this game, if you want a game that has lots of figures, that's really nice looking, it's fairly easy to set up, except for, you know, boxing the thing up. That's another challenge. I had to create my own foam core elements to keep all the cards and everything. So without that, it's, you know, unboxing and boxing can be a problem. But you can create just foam core things for that. But if you really want something that and you don't mind creating your own house rules, and if you want to use it, maybe even creating your own kind of games and having your own scenarios that you create, or make up your own kinds of things, even a random dungeon you can do, then that's a good game. But if you're wanting it it's great, and I will definitely keep it because that's what I will do with this. Making up my own ways of playing. But if you're wanting something that you just pull out of the box, you know, pull off the shelf and you just play it with the normal rules, it's probably not as good. And especially if you're looking for a campaign system. They do have kind of a campaign, but it really isn't kind of an immersive story, say perhaps like Descent or some of the other games. So that's the basics for Massive Darkness. Number 3. My number 3 dungeon crawl adventure type game is Mage Knight. Now, I list Mage Knight as number 3 mainly because it's not really a dungeon crawl. It's really more of an adventure game, but it is awesome. So the real value in this game, or the key thing, is the hand management. And each of these cards you can use in multiple ways, and it's just incredible gameplay where you're trying to decide what you want to do. Now, if you're looking for a dice chucker and you just get in there and beat up bad guys, then Mage Knight is not that kind of a game. But if you're looking for a very deep strategy and planning what you're going to do and going through and doing an adventure and figuring out things and especially leveling up. So the kind of thing that I wanted from Massive Darkness is the kind of thing that you actually get in Mage Knight. So it is incredible gameplay. Now, if you're considering a game that you want to get, the reasons you might not want to get Mage Knight is if you're not really wanting to get into the deep thinking, or if you get analysis paralysis, or if you're looking just for dice rolling, there are dice that you roll, but that's not really a major part of the game. And also, even though it's a fun game and you go and you conquer these keeps and mage towers and cities, really at the end it's kind of a score type of thing, especially if you're playing in the solo mode. Now, I haven't played it with multiple players, so you'd have to look elsewhere for understanding that. The other thing is getting into it. The learning curve starting out is really high. So you might want to check out videos. I've got a lot of videos that actually even have mini games that you could play, because the gameplay can also be quite long, more than an hour and a half, a couple of hours to 3 hours, depending upon how complex that you're playing. And so I've got some mini games that you can play within an hour or even a half an hour. So now, since I own both Massive Darkness and Mage Knight, another thing that you can think about doing is that you can actually use the Mage Knight cards and use Massive Darkness to have that kind of a Mage Knight feel within a dungeon. Of course, you have to create your own rules about, here we've got dungeons to explore in cities and villages, villages and monasteries to go visit, and so what would that equate to on Massive Darkness? But I've played it that way, and so if I want to have that Mage Knight feel in a dungeon, that's how I do it. So like I said, Mage Knight comes in at number 3, only because it's not really a dungeon crawler. One other thing that's pretty cool about Mage Knight is boxing and unboxing is pretty easy. And it's not a huge box, it's fairly small. You just need to put some of the components underneath this tray, and you probably want to organize them in, these are snack bags. So I've got each player or character in a snack bag. So that's another cool part about Mage Knight. But be forewarned, if you get Mage Knight, it's going to take up a ton of table space. So, that's Mage Knight. Number 2. My number 2 dungeon crawl game is the Dungeons & Dragons board game system. Actually, any of those games. I happen to have Castle Ravenloft, but they all play the same, and so any of those would be my number 2. The real attractive feature of the Dungeons & Dragons board game system is that it's just very easy to pull out and start playing for a little bit and then put it up. So when I was first starting to look, again a couple of years ago, at the dungeon crawl type of games, the thing that I thought about the Dungeons & Dragons systems was maybe it's too simplistic and maybe it would be too repetitive, but it turns out to be just really fun. I was initially comparing this to Massive Darkness and trying to decide which one I wanted, but Massive Darkness didn't come out soon enough, and I found this one. Someone had a used version that they were selling at a pretty inexpensive price, and so I went ahead and purchased this. And it turned out that this was really, really good. And the Massive Darkness thing didn't have the kind of experience difference of leveling up and unique characters, the uniqueness type of thing, the depth that I had hoped it would have. And so it turns out that this one, really, you kind of are getting in there and battling the monsters. And in this one, while you don't really, Castle Ravenloft, you don't go into the dungeon and come back to a city and that kind of thing. There is a kind of campaign with it. It has story text that goes along with it. So similar to Descent, it has that ability to have that little flavor text with it. So even in the first one, the Castle Ravenloft one, there is a different feel to the different scenarios. Some of them are time-based, and you have different goals and objectives. So you do have a sense of a different feel for each scenario. Now, if we just talk about miniatures, and we can say that Massive Darkness by far has the best miniatures of the games that I've talked about. Descent would be second. The Dungeons & Dragons ones, they're really not that great, but they're okay. Look at this character, for example. He's just kind of leaning back, and some of the skeletons and things. We've got little, very small figures over here. So they're okay, but they're not fantastic. But that's all right. If you look at the cards, for example, they're not really that beautiful. They're bland and kind compared to things like Descent and Massive Darkness, those are much more beautiful. And as you consider which ones that you might want to get, I would say look at the tiles, because the tiles are going to be fairly regular within a given game system. And so the look of the tile is one thing that would make a difference about what you choose. And also the different characters. Go and look online and see what the characters look like and what kind of theme that you're interested in. So as we compare the three games, Massive Darkness, Descent, and the Dungeons and Dragons games, I would say that Descent is actually the best of the scenario or campaign kind of systems. This would be second. Massive Darkness really doesn't have, it does have a campaign mode, but it's really not that great. And so, but this one here, just being able to play the system and just get in there and play it, and especially these regular square tiles, is just really easy to get out of the box and play, whereas Descent, it's a bit harder, a bit more of a challenge, but not too bad. The other thing that's really good about the Dungeons and Dragons games is the ability to explore. So pulling the tiles off of the stack really gives you a sense of exploring the dungeon, and my son enjoys that the most. And in fact, most of the other games don't have that ability. And in fact, the Dungeons and Dragons games are the only ones in my video here that has that ability to explore, really. Except for Mage Knight, you have that ability. So, but it's not the dungeon crawl. So, the final thing to mention about the Dungeons and Dragons games, at least Castle Ravenloft, and I assume the same is true for the other ones, is it's very easy to unpack and to also put away. Things are organized very well, and unlike some of the games, the box is not so tight that it's hard to get everything in. You will probably want to have bags or something containing all of your little elements, because there are a lot of them, but they're easy to put back into the box. Number 1. Well, I'm sure this is no surprise, really, but my number 1 choice for a dungeon crawl type game is Gloomhaven. So when I was first looking at all these dungeon crawl type games and trying to decide which one I wanted to get, the thing that kept me from getting Gloomhaven was, first of all, the price, because at the time it was about $150. Now you can get it around $100, a little bit over $100 perhaps. And the second thing was that I wanted miniatures, and so the standees with these little bases was kind of unappealing to me. So if you really need or want the miniatures and you're on a budget, then you definitely don't want to get this game. But for the sheer quantity of things in the game by itself, it's definitely worth the money. And I rank this as my number 1 game, even though I have just purchased it. But I've played enough of the other games, and I know the rules behind Gloomhaven enough to know that this is definitely, if I could buy only one dungeon crawl type of game, this is the game that I would get. Now, if I wanted to have the miniatures, I might, in addition to this, and again, if I'm on a budget, I might buy maybe a Dungeons and Dragons board game system, maybe a used version if I can find one, so that I could supplement it with the miniatures. But really, as you're playing the game, the standees are not really that bad. And again, getting back to budget, the question that you want to think about is how much value and replay you're going to get out of the game. And so even though this is a higher price game, the value that you can get out of it is really very large. So let's start with some reasons why you might not want to get Gloomhaven, even though I put it as number 1. If you want a dice chucker, whether that be a single die like in the Dungeons and Dragons types game, or multiple die where you roll either in Massive Darkness or Descent, if you want to roll the dice, then that Gloomhaven is not for you. If you want to have something that's quick to take out or put away, Gloomhaven might not be for you, or you might want to get some of the inserts or create your own insert because there's just a ton of components. If you know that sometimes you have analysis paralysis or you struggle with trying to make the perfect decision, then Gloomhaven might be a challenge for you. because in its gameplay, it has a lot in common with Mage Knight in the sense that you've got a hand of cards that you're trying to manage. They act like a timer, and you try to make a choice about which actions that you're going to play. And sometimes, when you're playing the game, the plans that you started out either are not effective, or what happens during the game may change whether those plans are going to be effective, and so you may need to change what you're doing. So it may not be that you can create the perfect plan. So if you like to do planning, but if things go awry, you adapt to it, then Gloomhaven is a good game for you. So now let's talk about what makes Gloomhaven great and why I put it as #1. And fundamentally, it's about the gameplay that we were just talking about, this hand management. So that's the thing that you're going to be doing over and over and over again. You're going to be in battles with the monsters by doing this hand management. And if that's what you enjoy doing, going through a dungeon with that, then this is the game for you. Of course, you've probably heard, if you know anything about Gloomhaven at all, about the unlockable characters and the scenario map, the very immersive campaign system, and the legacy style game. So if those things are things that you're interested in, that is so much the better, because there's no other game that comes close to touching that. But fundamentally, it's not about that as much as it is the gameplay. And so as you go forward, you are able to do a lot of things that make the whole experience fun, but the gameplay is what I think is the focus. So now let me use that to talk a little bit about one other point that I've seen people complain about, and that is, as I'm going through the scenario, and I'm not going to have any spoilers, but as you're going through the scenario, perhaps you come to a place and you fight, and it's a bunch of difficult monsters that you attack, and then you open a treasure and it's not a great treasure. And maybe even you take damage or something like that. Or perhaps you take damage and you don't have the ability to disarm the trap. And if you're expecting everything in the game to be exactly the way you want it, without you having to create any house rules or anything else like that, well, maybe there will be scenarios that don't turn out the way that you want them, but then I don't know what game you would find that would have that. So my answer to that is, if you don't want unlockable characters and you just want to play them all, well, open them up. Or if you don't like the way a scenario ends, change it. You're the one that spent the money. You can play it how you like, but it's a great design and a great campaign as it is. And so to get the most enjoyment out of Gloomhaven, I would suggest that you look at the scenario book as this incredible set of renewable or replayable scenarios. The other thing that you might be wondering about, and something that I thought about, was the legacy nature of the game, where you put stickers on the board and things change and you mark it up. So it's all marked up by the time that you're done. And you think, oh, well, what if I want to play it again? Well, you can get removable sticker sets, and so that's one thing that you can do. You could also make copies of the little player pads and mark on them if you want. But if you compare it to the other games that I have included here and think about them in terms of replayability, basically they may have a short or maybe 10 scenarios that you run through in a campaign or something like that, and then after that you have to replay those exact same scenarios. Or in the case of Mage Knight, you're kind of playing the same game over and over, and it's just the layout of the map that provides the variability. In this one, I would just say think about it as, well, all of the scenarios are just, instead of having to replay the same thing over and over again, you're just going through a ton of scenarios, and so you don't even have to repeat the same one. Now, what about if I want to repeat the scenario? Well, you can always, in the campaign system, if you're playing with the campaign system, you can always repeat a scenario that you've already done. But there's also a random dungeon style of play. And so there's a set of cards that allow you to actually play it as a random dungeon, and as a result, it can have that exploration kind of idea that the Dungeons and Dragons games have. So I put Gloomhaven as number 1 for me because it has basically the combination of just about everything that the other games have, with the exception of miniatures. So finally, here's a quick peek inside the Gloomhaven box and all the things that need to go in it. If you want to see how to put everything back in the box, I have a video on Gloomhaven putting it back in the box, and you can check that out. Okay, so here are my final thoughts, having purchased all these games and not being a professional reviewer, meaning the money comes out of my pocket and this is not my day job. So first, I like all of the top 5 games and I'm not going to get rid of any of them. If I were doing it all over again and only had one game that I could choose, I would take Gloomhaven, and the miniatures are not as big a deal as I thought they would be. Mage Knight, even though I love that game, Gloomhaven actually has the same type of feel in the hand management, and so I would actually go with that and probably would not buy Mage Knight again because the price has gone up so much. Descent, even though that is beautiful, and I like the fact that I've got it, Gloomhaven has the same kind of layout of the tile type of situation. A much better scenario system, and I don't have to kind of work around the 2-player mode, so I wouldn't buy Descent again. But if you're going for pure aesthetics, dice chucking, miniatures, and a little bit of a scenario, then Descent is a good choice for you. If you want the coolest miniatures and somewhat easy ability to lay out the game and start and play, then I would go with Massive Darkness, but that one you have to make sure that you're okay with customizing the rules. If you're just getting started, don't want to spend too much, and you just want to pull out a game, play it quickly, and have a lot of fun, then the Dungeons & Dragons systems are definitely ones that you should consider, since they're less expensive than the other games. Okay, that concludes my comparison of dungeon crawl type games. There are, of course, many other games that you could consider, but those are the ones that I've liked, and I hope that's been helpful for you.